undergraduate student workers and building cross-rank worker solidarity. My name is Emily Yen. I'm a visiting faculty scholar at the University of Virginia. I am the former president of UAW 2865 at the University of California, and a former coordinating committee member of the Coalition of Student Employee Unions. We have 3 panelists today. Emma Rose Borzakowski, who is a Wesleyan College alum and lead organizer for the New England Jewish Labor Committee. As a student, Emma Rose worked with Wesleyan's United Student Labor Action Coalition and organized undergraduate student workers. Next, we have Sophia Carr, who is an undergraduate student at Grinnell College and the co-president of the Union of Grinnell Student Dining Workers, which is the first legally recognized independent undergraduate labor union in the United States. We also have Nicholas Becker, who is an undergraduate student at Kenyon College and a steering committee member of Kenyon Student Worker Organizing Committee. And then lastly, we have a discussant, Shannon Potter, who is a PhD student in industrial relations at the University of Toronto and a member of the coordinating committee for the Coalition of Student Employee Unions. So we will start off with Emma Rose.
Hey, it's nice to meet everyone today, and good to see my fellow panelists. Shannon, hi. Thanks for having us here today, and I'm really excited to talk about undergraduate student workers. As Emily said, my name's Emma Rose. I graduated from Wesleyan with a BA in 2019, and when I was there, I worked as a worker in the sustainability office, in residential life, doing ad hoc tasks during reunion and commencement and different alumni weekends. And I had a lot of different jobs on campus. And we did not have a union at Wesleyan. While I was there, I was part of a student labor solidarity group. And I, through that, got involved in student worker organizing, and I ended up writing my undergraduate thesis on student worker unions. And so one of the reasons I'm excited to be on this panel today is I haven't ever had the experience of getting to be in an undergraduate worker union, but I have gotten to talk to a lot of folks who are currently organizing them and doing work on them through my research and then through later organizing. After graduating, there were a lot of lessons we learned from organizing attempts at Wesleyan and a lot of ideas that I and other student workers had coming out of some of the research that we had done. And we formed a group called the Undergraduate Workers Union, which is currently working to support student workers in organizing on their own campuses. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about my research, my experience organizing at Wesleyan without a union and trying to form one and how hard that can be these days. And also what the current state nationally, I don't know anything about Canada, looks like for undergraduate student workers, because I think things are in a lot of flux and there's a lot of growing excitement for that. So I can pass it to Nick and Sophia.
Sophia wants to talk a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Sophia. I use she, her pronouns. A little bit about myself. I'm a rising 4th-year sociology major at Grinnell College in Iowa. And like you said, the co-president of the Union of Grinnell Student Dining Workers. I joined the union around the first year my time at Grinnell during like a huge expansion fight that they had that I definitely will talk about, because that was like a huge strategic challenge for us. It was really big and really important. Yeah, I think I just got involved because around that time I was thinking more seriously in my sociology classes about class conflict, about what it means to be a laborer, and also about, I worked my way through high school, I'm working my way through college. And it kind of got to a point at Grinnell where I was like, okay, if I don't start demanding better, then like who's going to do that for me? And then the union was the place where I was like, oh, these people will do that for me. So it was nice to have that community. Our union is very strong. Like you said, we're an independent union right now, unaffiliated, but we have a lot of dedication within our ranks, within both our executive board membership and also our non-executive board membership. A lot of people getting the word out. It's now virtual. It's been super difficult, obviously, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to kind of get that organizing done. But we have had actually a tremendous amount of success despite those challenges. So like I can't speak highly enough about my fellow comrades in the union. They're just amazing. But yeah, we're still a relatively young union, so we're working on building solidarity among ourselves, among workplaces, and then also across schools. Being in Grinnell, Iowa, a town that doesn't get a ton of attention anyways, that is somewhat of a challenge as well. But we do what we can to do the outreach locally and stuff like that. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about the union and where we're at and a little bit of what we've been doing.
So my name's Nick. I'm a rising senior political science major. When I came to Kenyon, I'm a work study student. I looked for a job my freshman year. I couldn't find one until my second semester. And I worked in the history department as department assistant, and that was like really low hours. And our minimum wage in Ohio was like was $8.50 at the time. So I didn't make it close to work study. That being said, and then next year in sophomore year, I couldn't, that job wasn't available. So I ended up, by kind of my second semester of sophomore year, I was able to get a job as a desk assistant in the library division. But at that point, I had missed 2 semesters of being able to work on campus, and I looked hard for a job and couldn't find one, applied to places and didn't get in. That kind of immediately didn't think very highly of the Kenyon student employment system. But something that really put that into focus was COVID. When our campus closed, 80 to 90% student workers couldn't work. My job was fortunate enough to be able to work remotely, but I had like a friend who also works, a student works in the library, but just in a different office, who does hardware repairs, and obviously can't do that off campus. So he wasn't getting paid. So that is all. I was also a member of the Kenyon Young Democratic Socialists of America. We had a labor working group that had, during my time at Kenyon, we had been working with our local maintenance unions on campus. Kenyon, compared to some other similar liberal arts colleges, is pretty highly unionized and has a pretty active skilled trades workers, local electrical workers. So kind of with their help and guidance, we were able to petition to get for the rest of the school year to get everyone paid. And that wasn't like part of a union drive, but that kind of like that brought in a lot of people, got like 250 signatories, and kind of showed that there were huge gaps in the student employment system. And kind of like Sophia said, it's like, if we don't kind of advocate for ourselves, like no one's going to do it for us. Like it wasn't that the school was purposely trying to screw student workers over, but we were just completely left off of their decision making, right? They're like, oh yeah, we're not going to lay off any staff. We're going to make sure people are going to stay employed even if we can't work because of campus closure. But student workers were completely left out of that. So that kind of started the process of kind of forming Case Walk, this Kenyon Student Worker Organizing Committee. We started having meetings kind of about not only like COVID presenting a lot of issues with student employment, but also really highlighting issues that have been there for a long time, right? In some workplaces, we've discovered kind of what we believe to be systemic wage theft, people working way more hours than they're paid. A lot of sometimes can lead to abusive workplace in terms of no protection of student workers, in terms of their supervisors, or in terms of the services they provide to the campus. So over the summer, that's kind of, even though it was still in COVID, we were able to organize kind of remotely, and able to get backing from the United Electrical Workers, especially with great advocacy from the Maintenance Workers Local 712. That's how we got cards and started our public drive in the fall. And I can speak more to how that has unfolded since then, but that's kind of how we started.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, you can have Shannon Potter talk a little bit about CSEU, and then she has some questions for the other panelists.
So hopefully you can see my screen and also hear me. Now I can't see anyone. Yeah, it's
Yes,
good. You can hear
both
everything. Sorry. When you share screen, you lose everything. Yeah, okay. Thanks so much first, Sophia, Nick, and Amber Rose for joining us for this panel. It's always so awesome and exciting to hear specifically about undergrad organizing. And I've also had the opportunity to hear from some of you or others from your unions in the past, and it's always just like a really educational and inspiring experience. So yeah, thanks for joining. So I'm going to talk briefly about the Coalition of Student Employee Unions. So I'm currently a member of the coordinating committee. So Emily Yen has also been involved in the past, as has Emma Rose. And so the reason I want to talk about this coalition in the context of this panel is that one of the projects that we've talked about taking on was compiling resources, something like Forming a Union 101. And so the vision, like in very early stages, is something like, you know, you could go, depending on your province or state, you could access resources that tell you like specific steps on how you can organize. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to hear also from the panelists about what sort of resources would be useful given your organizing experiences. Yeah, so first I'll just tell you a little bit about the CSEU in case you don't know. So as the name suggests, the CSU is a coalition of student employee unions. So this includes both graduate and undergraduate student worker unions. The organization was formerly the Coalition of Graduate Employee Unions, or CGU. And so the CGU and now the CSEU historically and primarily has been holding annual meetings, which are a really great space for student employees and their unions to connect, to share resources and strategies with each other, and also to coordinate collective actions. It remains a volunteer-run organization. So the work is driven by the membership council, so driven by the member unions, and carried out by members of student employee unions. And last summer, the coalition voted to change names to reflect the actual membership of student employees, so graduate and undergraduate student workers. And we also incorporated federally in Canada as a nonprofit and voted to receive voluntary financial contributions from member unions to support, well, so far things like administration and the annual Congress, but also going forward, we're hoping to be able to hire a staff and be able to expand in that way. And so just to give some examples of what the coalition is working on, so some active initiatives include a sister union program, our solidarity committee, and we're working on a bylaws and collective agreements database. And so what I'm hoping, one thing I'm hoping that we can discuss today is pertains to this potentially longer term project. So creating a resource on forming a union 101. And so I guess what I wanted to ask, a first question is, just going to be, having gone through these processes yourself or being in a recently organized undergrad student union, just to see what are some resources that you had access to that were helpful for you, or resources that you wish you had access to. So just specifically, I guess, were there any resources that were helpful during your union's formation or in subsequent struggles after you were organized? And then also what resources might help strengthen your current union and help promote cross-rank solidarity. So I might actually just paste these in the chat and then we can see each other's faces if that works. So did you guys, I don't know if Emily, you want to moderate this, or yeah, does anybody have MIC or unmuted? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would love to hear from student workers who have also been in unions, but my experience as a unorganized student worker was that what helped me the most was seeing other unions and having the opportunity to talk to organizers and other people who had been through recent campaigns. When I was a sophomore in college, Trump got elected, and that my fall semester, and it was a kind of terrible year. I was feeling really disheartened and uninspired and worried about the future, scared for myself, for my friends, for my communities, um, and feeling really frustrated by electoral politics and what chance we had to build power. And as I mentioned, I had been in a student labor action project, a student labor solidarity group. And we hadn't been very active. Like, we were not a particularly well organized campus group until a woman who worked for Unite Here, who was helping coordinate cafeteria workers who across the state of Connecticut were fighting for for a new contract. She came to our group and she asked us to do student solidarity for the contract fight. And so the same semester that I was feeling really frustrated and scared and disappointed and angry and all these things, and but like mostly powerless, I also was going to all these rallies and seeing unionized cafeteria workers marching on the boss and making demands. And I think what was helpful about that is I saw a possibility for what it looked like to be organized. And I had a person who had a lot of experience to talk to. I talked to Christina, the organizer who had brought us into this campaign, and I started talking a lot to the shop stewards on Wesleyan's campus. And our student labor solidarity club completely transformed. We became much better organized. We learned what organizing looked like, and we got some actual training. And we also started to think about ourselves as workers. So initially we were doing this as in solidarity with cafeteria workers. But as I was going to these rallies, I started thinking about all the things going on in my own workplaces. And I'm lucky enough to have been in a position where I didn't need the jobs I was holding on campus to be able to stay in school like a lot of my coworkers. But I was working in Res Life, which had a large proportion of low-income students because it's often the highest paying job on campus, who were in pretty precarious situations. And we had no protections against disciplinary action or firing. And the same semester that I was going to all these rallies, at the end of the semester, 3 students were fired for looking high. And that was a huge turning point for me because the university couldn't drug test them. They didn't have any basis to say that they were high. They made this allegation. The students did not get a hearing. They didn't get a chance to defend themselves. Their records as student employees weren't looked at, and they were immediately dismissed. And I learned this as their coworker through gossip between coworkers. Like, we weren't even told. And this happened, I think, on a Thursday or Friday night. And then that weekend, I went to a rally where we were fighting for a contract that included things like disciplinary procedures, where people, had a right to appeal decisions made by the boss and to demand, a voice in their workplace. And I started to think about myself as a worker then, and the combination of being able to see what unionized workplaces could look like and having an organizer talk to me about what organizing would take was really transformative. The next semester, I sat down with some of the shop stewards in the cafeteria workers union, and they taught me how to have an organizing conversation. And they walked me through step by step what it meant to agitate and make an ask. And those were things I had never heard of before because a lot of student workers are pretty young and not necessarily coming from organized backgrounds. They might not have had experience working in other workplaces, much less organized workplaces before. And so I think a big resource was just having people to answer questions about what organizing looked like, having people who were off campus to answer those questions who weren't part of campus politics was really helpful. It was great to have an organizer come talk to me who wasn't spending every day in like Wesleyan student politics and who wasn't part of all the chaos that surrounded that, and who could give me the training. And so after we started having those initial conversations, Shannon, to answer your question like pretty directly, some of the things that were most useful is that we went to a bunch of labor notes trainings, and that helped us really get organized. We went to Chicago for the Labor Notes Conference, but we also went to regional trainings. We read the worksheets that were on their websites, and those things all proved really, really useful. But I think it was also having somebody to speak to who said, like, this is possible. Yeah, I'm curious, Sophia and Nick, what being in a workplace that is unionizing, or like Sophia coming into a unionized workplace, what that felt like.
Yeah, I wasn't around. I wasn't in college when the union formed. We formed in 2016, and I graduated high school in 2018. But I did get there in the middle of what we kind of just call like capital E, capital F expansion fight, which was like a really big effort. It lasted, I think, 2 years, pretty much 2 years. In 2017, because UGSDW, the Union of Grinnell Student Dining Workers, we were formed with a card check, which in speaking with past union presidents, they were like, the college like didn't take it seriously enough. Like that was one of the reasons that like we were able to do what we did, is because the college didn't think that it would be of consequence to allow us to organize, and they were wrong. Because we have just been aggravating them since then, which has been the fun part. But in 2017, we attempted to expand, because right now we only are legally responsible for the dining workers and people who work in dining services. And so in 2017, we were like, hey, all student workers are workers, even if they don't put on a uniform and a name tag and clock in and clock out like other workers do. We're all mostly doing some kind of work. So we wanted to expand fully to all student workers. And the college said hard no on that. There was a basically 2-year-long legal fight. We went through several levels of like labor relations board. We went through Iowa. We had a vote in which the students overwhelmingly were in favor of a total expansion. And then the college said, we don't like that. So they appealed to the board. The board ruled in our favor. The college appealed again. And it ended up going to the National Labor, or it could have gone to the like National Labor Relations Board, which at the time was Trump appointed, because this would have been 2018. At that time, being Trump appointed, there was a pretty big risk that they would overturn the regional decision to rule in favor of our vote. And then at that point also put all other graduate and undergraduate student unions at risk of existing. And so at that point we had to pull out. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because throughout all this legal fight, it was students, it was us, or not me specifically, but it was students who were going up against full-on union busting lawyers that the college hired. We have a whole thing on our website, but one of them was Proskauer Rose, a firm from, I think, based in New York. So like our college cashed out, and the whole time we were like, how about you pay us more instead of paying them all this money to do nothing? Because we're continuing to kind of talk about it and build solidarity across campus. But that legal, luckily we had, I think, one student and a half who were interested in going to law school. And so they were like reading up on labor law and doing all that dirty work, and they loved it. So it was really fortunate to have them. And I don't really know how it would have gone without them. So all of that is to say that legal resources would have been really helpful, especially up against a school that kind of likes to go against its own word. in saying that they push for social justice, and then on the other hand, not doing that at all in almost every way. So the legal help would have been incredible, even just someone, not even to represent us, but just to ask questions, you know, like, what does this word mean? What would be the consequences of doing this, of doing that, would have been incredibly helpful. And also in terms of resources, being independent, while that's like a huge source of pride for us, because like we were able to do this on our own and build the solidarity that we have on campus and across the nation on our own, it would have helped to have something else, you know, other people who were linked to us either through an international or even in our state, would have been really helpful. Also connections, networking to media outlets would have been really nice. We had to do all of that outreach on our own. We did get into some national news sources that covered our story, which was incredible. Garnered a lot of attention, especially from alumni who were a really big help throughout that. But yeah, and it's kind of weird to talk about because that took up 2 years the year after we founded. So when we're talking about the founding of UGSDW, it was the beginning, and then immediately we started making more and more demands. And the college didn't like it progressively more and more. But yeah, so to answer your question, legal help would have been really helpful. Just awareness campaigns probably with other colleges and universities and other student working organizations. While we did have some support, getting the word out more also would have been really, really great. Yeah, networking connections with other people. I know that we did, to echo what Emma Rose said, we did talk to a lot of other universities and colleges and student organizations to ask for advice, to commiserate about how much we hated what was going on. But yeah, so I think those would be probably my top ones.
Thank you. And Nick, did you?
Yeah, so I guess just like thinking back from the start of the campaign, what resources were helpful. Before we started doing like a lot of broad outreach, we did have like the kind of initial group that started it, had conversations with like existing student worker unions, including Grinnell, including RAPMU at UMass Amherst, and some others. And I think that was really helpful in kind of just like getting our bearings in terms of, you know, it's not completely without precedent, right? So when we would be having conversation with other student workers, we wouldn't just be saying like, we're the first one. We may have been the first part, that kind of what we were trying to do, especially trying to get voluntary recognition, which ended up being our campaign for this year because of the NRB. But like we were saying like, oh, trust me, like there are unions, like you're not, this is not some crazy idea. And that was really helpful. But in terms of also like other resources, frankly, looking, kind of echoing what Emma Rose talked about in terms of learning from the Unite Here folks, like learning from the other unions on campus was extremely helpful. And our skilled trades workers and the maintenance firm are like very active local. They wage aggressive contract campaigns, and just kind of learning that history. They waged a successful 9-month campaign against being outsourced, in which they won that fight in 2012. So we kind of like, we learned that history. We understood kind of the connections that have been built between them and alumni, which we ended up tapping into for our own campaign, which is really helpful. And then even during that summer, they went into a contract fight over retirement benefits, where the college was trying to take retirement benefits from all employees on campus, but they had to negotiate with the unions to make up for budget shortfalls. And they, like, we did a petition campaign in conjunction with their contract fight. And that just kind of, I think, really tied people to the fact that, like, you know, it was kind of like, in terms of how Kenyon treats student employees, it kind of disabused people the notion that the admin's always right, I guess, in that sense. That there were other groups on campus that, besides just students kind of, you know, resisting the admin or being mad about certain things that, like, you know, that they were upset with decision making. We are also extremely, extremely lucky in that the field organizer who services Local 712 is a Kenyon alum who was hired that year by UE for the Ohio region, Hayden Shortman. And he was the one who was able to give us a lot of kind of like the training groundwork to do this. So he led us through, he created a packet and led us through training and structured one-on-one conversations. That was the bedrock of our campaign in terms of when we first started doing outreach, when we first started setting up shop committees in each of our workplaces. We were doing it using the same training, using the same guide that was based on like how you conduct a workplace one-on-one conversation. So that was really helpful, I think, in growing quickly. Obviously, because that structure is very effective. Instead of just saying like, hey, want to join a union, like it had those steps he talked about. In terms of escalation too, we didn't call the question too early. We formed our committees. A lot of the early meetings were not talking about the union. Like we weren't lying to people saying like, oh, we don't want to form a union, but we were just like, we're trying to do this, but the first thing we're going to talk about actually is like, what are the issues in our workplace? Or sometimes the way we frame is what are the three things that we want to change in our office and make it better? Or what are the three things that we like about our office, but might be informal or just based on like one really nice supervisor that we want to actually put into like a contract? And that was something that really appealed to people, is a legally binding contract that can actually hold the college accountable. I think like college students can be like, oh yeah, like, supervisor is nice, but like, yeah, that makes sense. Like that should really be like a rule, in terms of, if I am able to get excused absences, that shouldn't just be based on my boss being nice because they might leave next year. So that was something that really appealed to people. But we were able to do that during the summer in terms of like, having those conversations, and then Hayden led us through the idea of taking those ideas and then bringing it to our supervisor. And knowing that the supervisor would have very little power to actually make changes on most of those issues, but that built confidence that we were able to confront authority, we're able to openly talk about the union or issues to improve our workplace in the workplace with our bosses. And that, led up in terms of doing more public conversations. And I would say fast forward to this semester, where we ended up going on strike for one day, where about 140 student workers participated, and then for 2 weeks, which about 175 student workers participated. There was no way we would have been able to do that without those really kind of boring, tedious early meetings with like 13, 12 or 13 helpliners and our immediate supervisor. That led to nothing at that time, right? But it built confidence, is that the conversations when we went back to those folks in the spring, they weren't built on nothing. It was built on, we already went to Brandon, that's my supervisor. We already went to the vice president of the library. They didn't get us what we want. This we have, it was built on top of a lot of previous organizing that would not have been able to, people would not have gone on strike if that wasn't the case. So I think it's really important that training that kind of Hayden led us through during the summer was critical to the success of the broader campaign and where we were able to get to. So yeah, I guess in terms of resource, helpful was Hayden being the like a staff organizer who was able to give a lot of his time to us. So kind of on the flip side, I guess what I would say is towards the winter and early spring, because Hayden is a servicing rep and not an external organizer, he got really busy with a lot of his existing locals in terms of contracts are up. So we went from having like, I don't know, 20% of an organizer to 5 or 10%. It's not his fault, but we got no extra staffing help or resources from our national union. And that was really difficult in terms of kind of keeping the campaign together, especially since the voluntary rec campaign, the college officially said no to us at the end of the semester. And we were definitely starting to see some issues of burnout, and having kind of a full-time organizer presence there to keep the committee together, keep that cohesion. I think, not that we fell apart, but that would have been really helpful. And obviously something that we still talk about with Hayden and our contacts in the National Union a lot is we need more staffing. Something we've explored is asking for resources to hire what's called project staff. So UE would pay for like a 6-month or 1-year term to hire maybe like 2 recent graduates who are on our committee this year, but are graduated, but could still have relationships with their workplaces, still have, the entire knowledge of the campaign from last year, and are able to maybe stay on and get paid for a little bit to help with that. That's not, we haven't gotten approved for that, but I could see that being really helpful. And I guess I'll just ditto the Sophia said about legal resources. I think that would also be super helpful, especially with the changing status of the NRB. And then also to echo Sophia, comms help is also really good. Like Sally, who's handled a lot of our press relations, did a really fantastic job, and a lot of our events were able to make some stories at the very beginning when we went public, and also during our strike phases. That being said, it's just incredibly difficult to maintain relations with the press. So for example, like the Chronicle of Higher Education, which was, I had no idea that group that on our committee were able to get that, but we got covered by them. when we went public. That was fantastic. That actually got the attention of our school quicker than I think like a letter from Bernie Sanders did. Like they responded to us and formed a committee on the board of trustees to look into the matter, right? They said no after a month, but they did that after the Chronicle article came out, not after the Bernie letter came out, which is really funny. But unfortunately, like that reporter just stopped covering us after that, right? So it'd been really great to get a follow-up article, let's say we went on strike, but it didn't come from the Chronicle, it had to come from other places. So I think just like in terms of training on how to continue those relationships, I don't really know how that works, but I know it's something Sally has echoed a lot. And then the last thing, and this is something we're really focusing on now, is that especially if it's not going to election, but even when student worker unions will have the election option going forward, I think it's really critical to have training and resources to kind of help with the corporate campaign aspect, right? So we try to do a little bit of, you know, looking at the connections in the board of trustees, what organization they affiliated with, right? What nonprofits do they sit on? Trying to map that web. It's very, like, it's a lot to do. We did like a very tiny bit, but it's really hard to do that and organize your workplace and maintain, you know, relationship with alumni, faculty, respond to the admin's attacks, and also try to research their weaknesses. So we're working right now with the Central Ohio Columbus AFL-CIO to see if they have connections, because a lot of our board members sit on organization affiliated in Columbus or based in Columbus, so that they might have a relationship with. We're also working with the local building trades unions. Currently, I think 6 building trades unions have workers on our library construction project. So we kind of contacted them late in the game, but that was a group that we think would really spook the college if they started making noises about our organizing efforts. Just because, I mean, that's a really important project for them that they've been counting on for years to be like this, you know, huge expansion of the college and whatnot. They wouldn't want to get that tarnished at all. And again, the members on the board of trustees, if they're, for example, one of our major donors is an architect, he likely has like major, not connections, but has dealt with building trades unions in the past for his projects. So that is a point of connection where we could potentially looking at ways to kind of circumvent the anti-union members of the board of trustees and get to people who might be more receptive, to kind of get them to be like, okay, you want to settle with us and not go through this long process. That's been an issue where we know there are people on decision makers at our college who would be more receptive to us, but they're being blocked by, for example, the chair of our board is the former human resources lawyer for General Electric. So obviously he's been running the show. He's been shooting us down every time. But if we are able to get like members of the decision maker or split the board, for example, that could prevent a very aggressive college anti-union fight next fall, right? They may not say yes to us, but they may not fight us as hard and make that as ugly as it might have well other been. So I guess to like summarize that, staffing and training for how to identify, like kind of doing corporate campaign research of the college, I think is really key, because I think it's very complicated with all the ins and outs of how a college or university is structured.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. This is really helpful for us as we like as CSU tries to put together resources. I mean, I agree that all these things would be like very helpful moving forward, and I'm like really excited about just this about expanding like organizational capacity to just share information. So with the remaining time, we'll open this up to the audience members to ask the different panelists questions. So you can, if you have a question, you can like write stack, I guess, and I can just call on people.
Emily, can I jump in real quick? I remember
Sure,
that I'm
yeah.
part of an organization that's trying to provide some of these resources. And I'm sorry for not mentioning that. The Undergraduate Student Worker Union came together in large part because undergraduate student workers can't get, have a very hard time, with the exception, I think, of Kenyon, finding affiliation from national and international unions to provide some of these resources, like organizing support or legal help. And right now, we currently don't have the capacity to provide those things either. And like long-term, what we ultimately need is for national unions to be willing to take on undergraduate worker affiliation. But in the meantime, we've been setting up office hours where undergraduate workers interested in organizing can meet with undergraduate workers who have been in unions and have been organizing. And we've also set up annual training conference for undergraduate workers in the Northeast. And this year, because it was virtual, it was national, to attend and come to a mix of sessions that both that combine like practical training and skills, and also a chance to just meet and talk to other undergraduate workers to try to build cross-campus solidarity.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that resource. I guess Jason had a question. So Sophia spoke of the need for legal help and direction from experienced unions. Did any of you reach out to the national unions for any help?
For our expansion fight, I don't totally remember, but also to be fair, I wasn't on the leadership at that time, so I'm not sure. I was still like a little baby first year when most of that was happening. That probably would be a good idea. Something that would have been nice. I think a question that I might pose to other people who have experience with national unions, obviously I know that being affiliated with them and like being a local of their union, like there is kind of like a contractual obligation to like provide that support. I'm not quite sure what that would look like for a non-affiliated union, for someone just like coming and asking for help, like what the extent of the advice that they could offer would be. But yeah, as for whether or not we utilize that resource during our legal fight, I'm not 100% sure. But probably would have been a good idea if they could offer that help.
Sophia, I know from talking to leadership then that they did ask and weren't able to receive it. And also like Grinnell has chosen to remain independent and has had like internal conversations, but also I've talked to some of the people who led your legal fight, and they it's hard to get national unions to want to invest currently in undergraduate workers, especially when they're not protected under, you know, a tenuous Trump board. Sorry, Emily.
Oh yeah. Thank you for sharing that information. I can speak a little bit about, since I was a member of UAW 2865, which did include undergraduate workers, since it included all TAs, tutors, and readers, and particularly the tutors and readers was a significant proportion of them, of tutors and readers who were undergraduate students at the University of California. And this formed like well before the union itself formed, well before like I was in graduate school. But in terms of like resources, like ongoing legal resources when there was expansions for some of these like working like classes of classification of workers, UAW provided very limited as an international legal support. Most of the legal support that we received, we had to like pay for like out of pocket, and we were able to like negotiate a rate like with a law firm that specialized in labor law in California. And for some of the internet, some of the international, most of the resources that are provided are like at the beginning are like with the campaign, with the with recognition, with like the election or et cetera process. But in terms of sort of this like ongoing support, I can't speak about any other internationals, but with UAW it was quite limited, which was a little bit disappointing, even as we were, back in 2017, 2018, we were expanding for student researchers in the University of California, which that's like 17,000 workers, and they didn't want to put any money towards it, which they just filed. So that's been a sort of ongoing thing. And I guess a little, this is about, and so I think that there's definitely, I guess, to be brief, like a lot of politics involved. Yeah, Nick.
I think Jennifer had her hand up.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for taking my question. Can you hear me okay? The volume all right? Cool. So, thank you to all the panelists and great discussion, really interesting. I think some of the points you raised really hit home, not just for union organizing, but in dealing with the universities generally. I think the way they yield their power really strikes home for me. And as I'm sitting here listening, I'm really trying to think about, I was really horrified to hear about union busting and these types of things that are going on. But I was trying to think about what mechanisms are in place to ensure the university's behavior is accountable, is above board, is fair. I mean, we have unions themselves. That's the whole point of having them. And it sounds like lawyers are a great accountability mechanism and going to the labor board, but are there other mechanisms in place, I guess, like public opinion and media? Like what other types of mechanisms can be drawn upon to hold the universities to a behavior in which they should be, following?
I had some thoughts about the earlier conversation with Shannon, but I also have some thoughts about the with Jennifer's point there, if that's okay too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess like in our experience, I guess with Case Walk over the course of our campaign, I would say I feel like lawyers and staff resources, while really important for the cohesion of the campaign, supporting student workers, giving the training, that does not hold the administration, the college accountable, right? They're not going to be scared by a group of student workers that maybe has been able to secure legal advice. The only thing I think that will, not the only thing, but I think that will hold them most accountable is thing that they really listen to, which is their reputation and their image in the campus community and the broader community, right? So like we were able to build a very strong community coalition of tenured faculty members, the other unions on campus, and really strong relationship with our campus newspaper. Not that they were being biased, but that they were covering us, but which is good because we wanted the spotlight on essentially everything the administration did. And I think that did ensure that their behavior, at least for the first semester, had the facade of really quote unquote taking us seriously, like really considering all viewpoints before they said no. And even after that, there was never really a strong anti-union push, aggressive anti-union push. Even within workplaces, there was never like one-on-one meetings with supervisors or captive audience meetings. We may see that in the future, but we never even saw it even during when we went into a strike phase or building up to a strike. And I think like there are ways I think that how do I want to put this? There are points of leverage that student workers can exploit in terms of building power, right? And I think what we discovered, and we didn't really think about this, it kind of happened, we kind of happened upon it, was we were trying to figure out when we went on strike, what does that actually mean? Like what is the most effective way on strike? It definitely causes issues for our supervisor for our division when helpliners go on strike. It's harder for people to get, their computer fixed or something like that. That doesn't really shut down production right at the university. What actually got the college's attention is when we started picketing admissions tours. They freaked out and they sent Campo on us. They threatened to call law enforcement, so on and so forth. And that overreaction built the strongest public wave of support for us as the union that we had ever gotten during the course of the campaign. In terms of, there were faculty members who are very conservative, probably like don't give a shit about this kind of stuff. Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily, but probably would never wade into campus politics that way, who were signing letters demanding answers in the college, so on and so forth like that. We were able to get a really big boost too, in terms of we actually got more people to join the strike for the second week after their overreaction than had been participating before. So again, I mean, that's kind of a weird example because it was a bad behavior, but there was talk about them disciplining students for their participating in the strike, like, summoning them for violating college policy. When we filed an unfair labor practice charge against the college, which is still ongoing, that all went away. No one was summoned for discipline. The rumors that we heard from people connected to the administration went completely away. So, I mean, there are ways I think that the college doesn't have all the power, doesn't have all the cards, but I would say that has to be built from a foundation more of a strong workplace organizing base and community coalition than just saying like, oh, we got you on the legal thing, right? So we saber rattled about them breaking labor law for months. But finally, we only filed it when we had like a wave of community support that was able to be timed with that I think was able to kind of make sure the college didn't do that again. Yeah, in terms of really trying to intimidate student workers who were on strike, and they didn't after that. Yeah, I don't know if other people may have other points of discussion, but I'll just say real quick, the corporate campaign aspect, which we haven't really fully developed yet, I think would also be key to that in terms of targeting the other, you know, especially the people who run the college. You know, I'm sure they would really not like if the law office that they're a partner at was being picketing outside by a local union that was affiliated with us, you know, 1,000 miles away. But that is something we haven't developed yet. I think it'd be really interesting to see how that would work with the kind of the campus campaign. And then just pivoting real quick, and I don't want to take up too much time with the national union. This is just an issue that Case Walk has talked a lot about. We are technically affiliated with UE. We're not a charter local because we're still in the process of organizing a campaign. We haven't filed for an election or won an election yet. But our issue with getting like resources has been, I remember even talking to folks, Grinnell, about this, right? So what's the point of like affiliating with the union that if you're not guaranteed to even get like the additional staffing resources that you would think that would come from that? And I think this is just an issue. We talking to our organizer, Hayden, who's obviously like really supportive and also very frustrated that we can't get the resources we need, is that we it has to make the case to, I think, national unions and the labor movement as a whole, that it's a worthwhile effort to organize undergraduate student workers. And I think the change in NLRB is something that I think more should be paying attention to on that level. Not saying I'm sure everyone here is doing that, but in terms of national leadership, because allowing with that, the election option opening, if they're able to put resources down on the front end, if they do it right, if they're able to do the right training, build a strong community coalition. And I think the real key would be getting to a first contract quickly, right? These units, the undergraduate student worker units, even though they're part-time at these colleges, are very large, right? At Kenyon, it can be up to 700 people who are employed in a given semester. It was down around 400 this year because of COVID, but that will probably rebound, right? So, you know, Ohio's a non-right to work state, right? So if you're able to build a strong union, win a strong first contract, that itself, it's able, the dues money that comes from that can then pay for, like, honestly, there's a better way of putting it. But it becomes sustainable, right? I think the idea is like there has to be a way of organizing where it's not just picking like, you know, we will kind of just organize on our own with Hayden in the 712, but actually like kind of starting a national movement in which we can actually scale up, right? Because if we wait just, you know, for it to come, as it's saying, the labor wait for people to come to them, you know, Joe Biden might not be president for years from now, it might be a Republican, and that board window goes away, right? And that ability to use the election option goes away to get, you know, to have quick elections and start the process getting to a strong first contract, right? And then you're stuck in the Trump era where you had grad students and undergraduate unions just completely frozen, or waging these voluntary recognition campaigns, which are way harder and way less likely to succeed. So I feel like, I don't know, it seems it's frustrating on my end, right? Talking to our national union, being like, you know, the NLRB is opening up. Why can't we get resources? This, like, you know, this is real now. This isn't just some kind of like wow project of one of your locals. But I don't know. I think I'm talking too long, so I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that information. I completely agree that with power mapping is really critical in reputational damage, which can look like different, look very different on each campus and the particular set of tactics used and who the targets are. I'm just thinking a little bit about some of the campaigns that involve direct actions. There was a very visible campaign that we did about sexual harassment on Admitted Students Day in front of 10,000 parents that was in Poly Pavilion, that was very effective because that was a direct that they had to directly confront that, and it definitely caused reputational harm to the organization. So definitely, obviously that can look like different things in different campuses, but I think that's something that we should that I just wanted to underscore with Nick about that this is definitely a key mechanism, and there's certainly others. Let's move on to Sophia.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the kind of hitting them where it hurts strategies. You all talked about admissions. One thing that we weirdly found really useful was our alumni network. I, during my first year, worked at what was called Phonathon, which was where we sat in a basement and called alumni and asked them for money. and it was terrible, as you can imagine. But I worked there for a little while, and during this expansion fight, a lot of, like, once it hit kind of the national news network, we actually got a lot of alumni who, when we were calling them, were saying, hey, talk to me about the union. And then we talked to them about the union, and then it would end with them saying, well, tell them that I'm pulling my donation to the college, and then I'm gonna give directly to the union, or not, or just pull it until they like stop union busting, was like a big thing that alumni were saying. And it got to the point where when someone did that, we were required to tell the supervisor so that the supervisor could tell the Department of Alumni Relations about it, because it was becoming an issue. They were losing on, like, people who were giving year after year were stopping giving. And I think that that was a network that was really useful. And it was funny because a lot of them were like kind of oldish people who were like, you know, Grinnell like radicalized me and now they're union busting. Like, what is that about? So using those people and people who have had some like experiences with the college, I think was also really helpful. Other mechanisms, honestly, at Grinnell, there aren't a ton. I'm envious of what Nick said about faculty, because our faculty basically had like a mute order. Like, they were not really allowed to talk about it. I don't know exactly what administration said to them or threatened them with, but they would not talk about it even if they were in full support of the union. But I think one big thing that we benefited a lot from was just making ourselves available to commiserate about stuff, to talk shit about our boss, to, you know, complain about the nonsense that the administration was saying, mostly behind closed doors in bargaining and in other meetings and in emails where they talk poorly about student workers and, you know, kind of downplay our value as both students, humans, laborers, and all of the above. And so, yeah, just like talking that groundwork, I think someone mentioned it, just like reaching out and talking to people and doing all of that labor of talking to each other and making it known what they're actually doing that we don't see, was like a huge help. And social media was great with that, because we were able to make memes about it and post it on Instagram, and people loved those. So it was a lot of kind of informal mechanisms that we developed over time, and a lot of them were surprises, but that ended up being pretty helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, Emma Rose.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Nick was saying. I wanted to note the three of us are all speaking from a perspective of having been at private liberal arts schools. Emily, I appreciate you noting how big the California student worker system is. Like, there's so many student workers in the union there. And as a result, there are so many undergraduate student workers. And to Nick's point about how important this workforce is, student workers often work part-time, and they, by definition, have a lot of turnover. But pre-COVID, 8% of America's workforce was also a student worker. And now most of those workers did not work at private liberal arts schools. Most of those workers work part-time, going to some form of class, maybe at community college or state college, and also having a job. But these are a lot of workers that the labor movement needs to be organizing, who interact with other full-time workers every day. And by organizing, admittedly, a very hard group of workers to organize, part-time workers, high turnover, young workers, I think the labor movement has a lot to gain in terms of setting up a next generation of unionized workers, of setting up a next generation of workers who understand what collective power means, and by organizing workers who often are in very economically precarious situations. So this is like a really diverse national pool of workers that takes up a huge swath of our economy and isn't isolated I mean, I think that the 700 student workers at Kenyon are like incredibly important, but they're millions of us as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess Nick, we're sort of running out of time, but yeah, if you want to.
Really quick response. I think Emma made a really fantastic point, and I think in terms of like our ability to make a case to kind of like the national labor movement is kind of like what like obviously a union at a college, at a university can obviously improve and should improve the lives of the student workers who are there right now. But as Emma said, right, it's a high turnover workforce. Not everyone, like, you know, it'll only be like four years max that you would be able to get the benefits of a union at Kenyon, for example. That being said, I think the labor movement should really see this as like laboratories for, or like schools essentially for sending, imagine like each class of people who graduate from Kenyon who's in a union. I'm just using Kenyon as an example, right? You know, 100 to 200 student workers every year graduating the labor force. That's 100 to 200 student workers who've now been in a union shop, right? So like the AFL-CIO I know before is like oscillated between like, how much we emphasize organizing, but they've done, a lot of emphasis on like college, or trying to recruit college graduates as staff organizers and whatnot. But like, imagine instead of doing that, we actually organize like people as their workers, as student workers before they even get out into the labor force, right? So all those people either entering the labor movement directly or whatever workforce they join will then have like the training already done in their own union if we build these unions correctly and democratically and run them right. In the labor, I mean, the possibilities I think are really like, I mean, Emma was just kind of talking about it. I just want to emphasize like that, I think is a really good case to make, not just like, oh, obviously it will improve the lives of people there and there are issues absolutely that need to be addressed in student employment systems because they're really terrible and exploitative, but it also has transformational value for the labor movement as a whole. I mean, just as an example, a lot of people at Kenyon, and this is just because of the background of Kenyon people, go into nonprofit, go to work at nonprofits. Nonprofit organizing has been a huge area of growth for the labor movement, and something that like having trained people going into unorganized nonprofits could be really transformational for the unions that are organizing there. It'd be really helpful for that. So, yeah, I just want to emphasize that point. That was a really good point.
I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on this panel. I've taken tons of notes and bringing back to CSU tons of ideas for resources that could potentially be quite valuable. And yeah, it's great to hear from you guys. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shannon, and thank you, Emily. And it was great to everyone who was here as well. Jennifer, nice to hear your questions.
Thank you. That was great.
Okay, I'm gonna head out, but thank you both.
Thank you, Emma.
Really nice to
see you. Emily.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy? Like, so
yeah.
were you in the last session, the young workers?
You should stop recording now.
Oh,
sorry.